Doctor, 1938, the Bronx, New York. Let's go back to when you were a little boy. What do you remember from the Bronx?
Lots.
Have at it.
Well, the first thing is we lived in an urban area, and in that urban area, what I remember precisely is that when a car came by at night, what they had is they had the headlights painted black halfway, and I couldn't understand that because it was a whole headlight. And then finally I got the explanation. This was when I was about 4, and then I got it about 5. But an interesting thing that I remember.
Well, wait, what was the explanation?
The explanation is they wanted to keep the light in the city down so that the enemy couldn't find you. And so it was very, very dim outside. They had overhead lights that were very dim, and you couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
But I didn't understand that explanation until later. I just understood it's because of the war. And that's what they told a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Now, when I went to school, and this was one early remembrance, and I was a pretty serious kid, I had difficulty in learning. And it was just amazing to my mother. And she was all frightened, and this was before attention deficit syndrome and all the things that are going on now. And she took me to the doctor. Now, this was after the school teacher called her in and told her there's something definitely wrong with this boy because he can't write correctly and he's not learning how to read correctly. So she took me to the doctor, and I remember it was Dr. Schultz. And he was in walking up Brownstone, and his living room was his waiting room. And then he brought me in, and my mother was saying, oh, blah, 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 and the teacher said this and that and that and that and that. And what I'm doing is I'm sitting there saying, Ma, what are you talking about? So he says to me, very relaxed, he says, what's the matter, kid? And I said, I don't know. He said, the teacher said I don't know how to write. So he gives me a piece of paper, tells me to write something. And he sits back and he kind of smiles. And he says, Mrs. Feld, I know what's wrong with you, son. And he picks the paper up and he puts it up to a mirror. And I was doing mirror writing. Now, the take-home point of that was they made you at that time write with your right hand. And I was a lefty. So he takes the pencil out of my right hand, puts it in my left hand, and I write. Perfect. I mean, I was on the way to the hospital, I thought. And so that was kind of interesting.
Now, did you ever find out why they, when people are left-handed, I'm left-handed too, they always wanted you to switch to become a righty?
Well, because it's dexterous, and a lefties are sinister. So if you were a lefty, left is S-I-N. Right. So if you're a lefty, it's a bad omen. So the superstition in the 40s was lefty. And they kind of forced people to do it.
Yeah.
It helped later on when I was in junior high school because I broke my arm. And I had to write with my right hand. And I did very well in school, and the kids that I was competing with did well also, but I had an advantage because the teacher let me take the test a little longer than the other, and there was a whole rebellion about that. And but I did know how to write righty, and I did straighten out my brain so that I could write it without it being backwards.
Yeah. What did your dad do for a living?
He was a manufacturer of women's clothing.
Okay. And your mom, stay-at-home mom, or was she working?
Yeah, no, she was a stay-at-home mom until the kids were a little older.
Okay.
And then she went back, and she used to like to say she ran Fordham Hospital. And she probably did, because she ran the record room. And she did that for many, many years before they retired.
Now, do you remember your grandparents at all?
Yep.
Tell me about them.
Well, they were quite a couple. They were both pieces of work. We'll start with my grandmother. My grandmother was the boss. And she was the boss of the whole family. And she'd tell you, go do this, do that, do this, and everybody went. My grandfather when he came to the United States and he was trying to get a job and figure out stuff, he worked in a slaughterhouse, got hit in his head. And so he was supposed to be deaf. He didn't hear that well. He was supposed to be deaf. And my mother's sisters would come to the house on Saturday, and we'd have a meal on Saturday evening, and my grandmother was always telling them something about my grandfather. My grandfather at that time had a hearing aid. I remember this precisely. And we're sitting in the living room, my brother and I and him and my father, and he has his hearing aid on the table. I said, "Pop, what are you doing with the hearing aid on the table?" "Well, she thinks I can't hear anything when my hearing aid is down here." I can hear everything she's talking about. So that was a spectacular little story about my grandfather.
Okay, where did he come? You said
they both. Well, my grandfather and grandmother came from Russia.
Did they come together?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. And yeah, that's where they came from.
Did they ever tell you about those travels?
No, they never talked about it.
Okay, so but
I don't have remembrance of it.
Did they come with their whole family, or did they come alone?
They came alone.
Okay, so they never saw their family again?
I don't think so.
Okay, do you know what year about this was when they came over?
In the early, they came, actually, they might have been married, because one of my mother's sisters had came with them. It was in the early 1900s, 1908 or 1910. This was when there was some chaos in Russia, I remember that. Right. And then there was a lot of chaos after they left, but they had no trouble.
You know where they came from in Russia? What town?
I think it was Kiev.
Kiev, okay. What about now these?
And that was part of Russia at that time. It wasn't Ukraine. Right.
Now, your grandparents that you were talking about, were those your dad's folks or your mom's folks?
No, that was my mother's folks. Okay. My dad's folks I don't know anything about, except that they were very successful in America. And they were second generation Americans that came from Germany in the 1890s or so. And they died relatively young of some illness before I was born, actually. So they died in the early 30s.
Do you know what your grandfather did for a living?
Yeah, my grandfather was a furrier in New York, and one of the, I think, 28th Street furriers.
Now, growing up, was there sports involved at all when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, everything. Yeah. I have a great story to tell you. We lived on Mount Eden Avenue. Now, some people might know Mount Eden Avenue, but in Mount Eden Avenue, there was a park right across the street from our apartment house. And we had a whole bunch of friends. I had a whole bunch of friends that my age that played baseball all day long. So we would go to the baseball field in the morning. This is in summer. This was our summer camp. We go to baseball field, play baseball for 3 or 4 hours, and then come home for lunch. And then go to either the Yankee Stadium or the Polo Grounds. Uh-huh. Now, how did that happen? We didn't have any money, but we had enough money to buy a Yankee hat and a Giant hat. And the whole team met at Geller's Candy Store at about 12:45. And we went, and we all had a nickel because the subway was a nickel, and we had a nickel, and we went from Mount Eden Avenue subway on the 8th Avenue to 161st Street, where the Yankee Stadium was, if the Yankees were in town. And we get a transfer at the subway. Then these cute 9-year-old or 8, we weren't even 9, we were 8, my mother let us go. We'd stand outside the box seats. And there were different entrances for different box seats. And every day in the summer, somebody would take us in.
Wow.
Because they had, the boxes were 8 seats at that time. And if it was a business lunch, they had 4 or 5 or 6 seats taken so they could take 3 kids in. They took us in. The game was over at 4:30. And for that same nickel, because we had a transfer, there was a shuttle that went from 161st Street to 155th Street, the 7th Avenue. I think that's called the number 1 train now. And we would take the transfer across, get on the appropriate train, and go up to 174th Street, which was 174th Street and Jerome Avenue, walk home, be in time for dinner. Nobody got excited about where we were. and then we ate dinner and we went out and played baseball again.
Yeah.
And that was a couple of summers.
Who were some of the Yankees back then?
Well, I saw Mickey Mantle very, very early. The first game I went to, this was actually, I went to a game like that just before the end of the war in 1945. And then in 1946, everybody came. So it was Phil Rizzuto, Mickey Mantle was in 51. But Joe DiMaggio, Charlie Keller, and Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown was a little later, but they had a fabulous team post-war.
Did you ever get any of the autographs from these guys?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they kind of even recognized us. And the reason they recognized us was because the Herald Tribune, now it's an international Herald Tribune, but it competed with the New York Times at that time, they had something called the Herald Tribune Fresh Air Fund. And every Saturday, if you went to your local police station, you can get a ticket to go in and interview one of the players.
Wow.
So when Mickey Mantle first came up, they had him be interviewed by all these kids. They had 100 kids, 150 kids that they let in. And then they give us autographs, they talk to us, and they're very friendly. And a whole Yankee team from, I guess I did that from, it's about 46 or 47, I was 7 years old, maybe 8, to 50. Because then another generation of Bronx kids would do that. And then when the Giants were in town over the weekend, the Herald Tribune Fresh Air Fund gave you tickets for the Giant game. Now, I remember, and this is really funny and to be remembered, my brother, he's 4 years younger than I am. And he came, oh, take me to the game, take me to the game, take me. I said, first of all, you're too young, you're too short, Mom's not going to let you go with me. When you're 7 or 8, you can go. Oh, no. So he broke me down. And then he and I convinced my mother to take him. But I couldn't get a ticket from him for him from the police station. Well, what happened is I took my ticket. I said, okay, we're going to take a chance. If I can't get you in, I won't go in. So we go down to the Yankee Stadium. This was Yankee Stadium, I remember. He's standing on line, he's a little kid. And I said, you just stand under my wing here. And when I get to the guy who's taking the ticket, and I'm going to get you in. That was the best day of his life. And to this day, we not only remember it, but he's built the Field of Dreams on his farm out of town here.
Oh, wow.
And we go out like two old codgers, and we put on our Yankee uniforms. He has an automatic pitching machine, and we hit balls until we're going to drop.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, but so we knew all of those people, and when they came up, when they first came up, I remember Willie Mays, and I don't know if you know anything about any of those baseball players then except their names, but Willie Mays was the Say Hey kid, and he was about, maybe 19 years old when he came up. And the first week that he was at the Giants, they let us interview Willie Mays. He was the greatest. I mean, hands down the greatest. And that was one of the thrilling days of the Knothole Gang, or not the Knothole Gang, the Fresh Air Fund.
They said Willie Mays would have had the home run title if he would have played anywhere except where he played in New York.
Oh yeah, wow.
Because it was so deep to left center.
Yeah, it was hard to get a home run there.
Yeah.
But if you pulled the ball, it wasn't. It was a little short on the size, but
yeah.
But those were the days when people worshiped baseball. I remember when the Giants won the pennant, and Bobby Thompson, and this was 1951, and Bobby Thompson hit that home run,
right,
off Ralph Branca.
Right.
Well, we were in the apartment, and we were the first people on the block to have a TV set. Now, it was a 10-inch TV set maybe, or whatever. Mm-hmm. The whole baseball team was in the house watching the game. And when that game was over, and this was just something, and Bobby Thompson hit that home run. Bobby Thompson was not great. You could depend on him to not get a base hit with 2 out. He hit that home run, we were astonished. And I remember everybody we got to get pots. and everybody got pots from my mother's kitchen, and we opened all the windows, and so I'm banging the pots outside. It was, you know, how does that spontaneously happen?
So you were okay with the Giants winning, even though you were a Yankee fan.
Yeah, well, you know, it's the home team, and when you, and even now, you know, when I watch a game and it's not a Cowboy game, let's say,
right.
If it's some, I pick sides and I decide on who I want to identify with, and I think most people do that.
Yeah.
But I played baseball in high school, and then I wanted to get to medical school, so I couldn't play baseball in college. So I ended up being the manager, you know, as somebody carries a water bucket.
Yeah.
So, but you know, and I didn't have to spend as much time there, so I could study.
You stayed around the game.
Oh yeah.
You know, you were born in '38. Did your folks talk to you about how the Depression might have affected the family before you were born?
Well, it affected my father's business, and then they got sick shortly after that. And I don't know what happened there, and then they both died. I think they died of a viral illness. But he had a big fall, because that's a luxury item, fur coats, and nobody had any money to buy fur coats, so he probably had a tough time. But there was not much talk about the Depression, and there was not much talk about the war that I remember. And we didn't have any war games. I remember I had one bombs away thing. You put darts in this thing, and then you go and you press the button, and if the dot lands in the right place, you've shot up the town. You know, because it had a corkboard on the ground with a map. But that's the only thing I kind of remember about it. In terms of hardship, during the war, that was kind of interesting, because gasoline was rationed, and you had a ration book.
Right.
And we always kind of went for a ride on Sunday.
Right.
And that was it. Otherwise, it was public transportation. And I remember my father had a car. The car, we lived in an apartment, so we had a car in a garage about 3 or 4 blocks down. And but didn't do much traveling except for that.
So that was how people lived back then? You were in an apartment, but you had a garage, but it was several blocks away?
Yeah, they live there now, like that now, in New York City.
Interesting.
Rather, you know, if you're in a new building, they have a parking lot, but if you're in an older building, or if you're in the Bronx, I'm sure that garage is still there.
Yeah. Where'd you go to high school?
I went to William Howard Taft.
And tell me, what was
It's
high
in
school
Bronx.
life like?
Oh, high school was great. I mean, everything was great. You could ask me any year, and I had a great time all over. High school was, I'll give you a nice story about high school, and I don't know that I've ever told my kids this story. I was a good student, and I wasn't getting many questions wrong on any test. And in geometry, I remember I didn't miss a question. And on a geometry Regents, I didn't miss a question. And we get to algebra, and I had a teacher that was good, and I did very well. And then we get to trigonometry, and I had the chief of the department. This guy was the most boring, antagonistic guy that I ever met. And it was during the spring, during baseball season, and I didn't know a damn thing about trigonometry come the quarter test, or you know, the halfway mark. And it's just before the baseball season, or the baseball season had started, but it was raining. And they sent us to the study hall, the 9th period, or the 8th period, I think it was. And I'm sitting there, and I'm doing my homework, and I'm kind of down. And the teacher who taught me geometry, who I loved, and I really related to, she was also a guidance counselor. So she came over. "How you doing, Stanley?" And I said, "I want to tell you something, Miss Weir. I don't understand a damn thing about geometry. I can't stand this guy Berger. He is." I list all the things that he is. And she said, "Well, what period do you have lunch?" So it was the 5th period, and I had trig the 6th period. So she said, "Well, I'm teaching trig the 5th period. We'll just switch your lunch and transfer you into this class." Yeah, okay. She said, "There's only one hitch here. The hitch is that tomorrow we're having that half trig exam, and that's 50% of your mark or 40% of your mark." So I said, "Well," but I'd rather be with you because maybe I'll understand the rest of it. And so it was a couple of chapters in the book, and I go home, and every night that I would go home and try to learn it from the book, I couldn't. That night was a different night. I learned everything, and I didn't get a question wrong on the trig test the next day.
Wow.
Well, it was an important life lesson, because if you have barriers or perceived barriers, what you do is the barriers get bigger. Right. But if the barriers are gone, you can go through anything, right, and you can learn it. And I've applied that lesson. Just this was a silent lesson that I learned to myself. In
high school, you started. Is that when you first started thinking about being a physician? When you got older?
I think I was being brainwashed all through my life, because I remember one fabulous quote that I quote my father about, and we were talking about, what are you interested in, and what are you going to do? And I was not little, but 8 or 9, and he said, "I'll tell you, you could do anything you want to do, except you have to be a doctor." And so if that influenced me, but I remember that exactly. No, I think, the reason I threw the story in about Schultz is it was so spectacular how he problem solved among all this spaghetti that was coming to him, and just picked a piece of paper up and put it on the wall. And I said, gee, that's something that I'd like to do. Yeah. And, I was in first grade, so it could have been from then. Without having any idea of not only what hoops you had to get through to get to college, and what hoops you had to get through to get to medical school, and then through the training. So I think it was early on, and I kind of just liked helping people. Like I used to teach kids in math all throughout high school, all throughout public school and high school, the kids in my class that weren't doing any, just kind of helping people.
Now, where did you go to college?
Columbia College.
Columbia College. What was the first job you had?
It was when I was in junior high. And somehow, one of the guys on my block was delivering the New York Times to classrooms. And he was tired of it. And I was in 7th grade. And he was in 8th. And he said, "You want to do it?" And he told me how much you made, and I don't know what it was. And I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." Yeah, he said that the requirement is you have to come into school an hour earlier, get the paper and deliver it to all the classrooms. And then the classrooms, at that time, the Times was giving, 30 kids in a class, 30 papers. So you have to deliver it all over. So I did it, and it was real hard because there were a lot of classrooms. So I figured out myself, without reading an entrepreneur book, I hired a couple of people to deliver the Times, and we got it done in 15 minutes. That was my first, and I made some money. I didn't give them the whole deal. I gave them most of it, and then I made something off the workers, and so I realized how it works without anybody formally teaching me how it worked.
Talk to me now about Columbia.
Well, Columbia was terrific. You must remember, there were 2 guys, myself and my best friend all throughout, that were at the top of the high school class. And we didn't go to Bronx Science because his father said, "You better be a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big pond." And so he convinced me to go to Taft. So we went to Taft, and we were in the top of the class, and we both were admitted to Columbia. But I remember I got the interview, and this was before early acceptance or anything like that. I got the interview, and I think I was a little, I thought it was I did a good interview. And the guy said to me, "Yeah, you'll probably get in. We'll know in 2 weeks. If you don't hear from me in 2 weeks, call me." So, here you're a 17-year-old kid. Columbia College is this big mountain in the sky. And 15 days later, I called him. Didn't answer me. 17 days later, I called him. He didn't answer me. So I called and told the secretary, look, he told me to call him in 2 weeks. And he really ought to be courteous enough to call me and tell me whether I made it or I didn't make it. 2 days later, he called me and I made it. So that was an experience where you say, if you step up to the plate and ask for what somebody told you, maybe you'll get it, but at least you stepped up to the plate and you weren't shy about it.
Now, what was your high school friend's name that went there with you?
Albie Padua.
Okay.
And Albie Padua, oh yeah, we saw him about 8 months ago. Albie Padua is a professor of chemistry, and I think he's emeritus now, but he still has a couple of people he's teaching. And it's organic chemistry and it's radical chemistry. So if anybody wants to look up Albie, they could look up Albie. It'll be in the Wikipedia on
Vietnam War. What's going on? And you going to the Air Force. When did that happen?
Well, at that time they had something called the Berry Plan. And what the Berry Plan did is it gave doctors a deferment to the end of their training. And this was pre-war, it was post-Korea, and it was 1960 when I graduated. I graduated in 63, so I had from 63 to 67, I was supposed to be deferred.
Right.
Well, 65, Vietnam started, and they took all the deferments. Like they had a pile. Yeah. They took the first part of the pile and they threw it away, and I got drafted. Then somebody said, and I was in my training, and somebody said, well, you ought to go down to Washington, to the Defense Department and Air Force, and see what they could offer you. And I was terrified about going. We were married at that time, and we were planning on having a family, and I was terrified. I went down to Washington. Remember, it was a cold day. I go to this guy. This guy was so pleasant, and he's turning pages, and he's showing me this beautiful Air Force base with this housing, and this in California, and that. And what he was doing, it was kind of steering me to California. And I said, that's the same zip code that the guys in Vietnam have to send their mail to. Where you have to send. I don't want to have anything to do with that. So I let it go. And they sent me to Blytheville, Arkansas. Well, everybody was, Blytheville, Arkansas. Everybody in the hospital, Blytheville, Arkansas. Well, they can't even speak English. What are you talking about, Blytheville, Arkansas? Blytheville, Arkansas was, to me and to Cecilia, I don't think Cecilia would be as exuberant about Blytheville as I was. It was the greatest experience, or one of the greatest experiences we had. We get there, and they didn't have enough room to train me. You're supposed to go to basic training, even physicians. So they didn't have enough time because they needed people so badly. They sent us directly to Blytheville. I go to the commander's office. This is an MD, he was a colonel, and he said, I understand you didn't have any basic training. I'm going to assign you to somebody that knows this great. And so he assigns me to Norris. Norris is a chief master sergeant who was the greatest. So Norris takes me outside. He said, okay, I'm going to teach you how to be a soldier. He said, I'm going to tell you who to salute, who not to salute. Who you salute first, or they have to salute you first, and then you salute. And in about an hour and a half, I became a soldier. Then he takes me to the bursar, and the bursar throws $1,000 at me for uniforms. He said, okay, we got a lot of stuff to buy. And he gets me uniforms, and he doesn't buy me officers' uniforms that are. He said, I say, Norris, what's wrong with you? I'm an officer. He said, don't worry, you just follow me. And the officer, he gets me airman's uniforms, and then brings me to a lady and converts the Air Force uniforms to officers' uniforms. And he said, now you're getting to understand how the Air Force works. Okay. And with that difference, because we came down, it was hot as hell on the way down. And we came down, and Cecilia was pregnant. And she couldn't breathe. I said, don't worry, we'll keep the windows open, it'll be fine. We had a 1963 Dodge Dart. Well, after I had whatever I had left over, Nora said, give me your car. and I'll take care of you. And he went downtown and he got me an air conditioner. That was the coldest air conditioner I ever had. You had to have a Mackinac on to let it go because it wasn't adjustable. So, you know, that was how the Air Force went. And I can tell you, the people were great. And the people in town were great. That is a funny story. When everybody in the hospital, and I was at Long Island Jewish Hospital for my internship and residency, when they heard that, they were kind of like feeling sorry for me. Well, one guy, a pediatrician, came up, and his name was Gittleson, Stanley Gittleson. And he came up, and I'm in the men's room. And he said, I heard you're going to Blytheville, Arkansas. I said, yeah. He said, my roommate at Cornell is in Blytheville, Arkansas. And his name is Jerry Cohn. When you get to Blytheville, you look at the telephone book, you call up Jerry, and you say, Gittleson sent me. So I call him up on a Sunday afternoon about 2 o'clock because we got there, you know, on the weekend, and I had enough time to call him up. And I said, Gittleson sent me. So then we go into this whole story, and he invites Cecilia and I to the house for dinner. And they took us in like we were their children. And they introduced us to the Jewish community, and we went to temple there. And this was the most amazing thing. The biggest building in town was the temple in Blytheville, Arkansas, town of 25,000 people. And why do they have such a big town? They're bigger than the big buildings are bigger than the churches here. Well, the thing that happened is Jews came from Galveston, and they came up the river, and they settled from the Mississippi River. They settled, and they opened up stores, you know, within a 60-mile radius of Blytheville. I mean, they did that all along the Mississippi, but this was a 60-mile radius of Blytheville. And in that 60-mile radius, this was the middle. They built the temple. Yeah. And they had about 70 families, and they all were just wonderful. I mean, and why it was wonderful is because when you're a New Yorker, you have a very provincial view of the world and of the people in the world. I mean, it's just it's the craziest thing. You know, one of my classmates, and you might have seen it, he did a map. He was a editor of a magazine called A Jester at Columbia at the time that I was a senior. And at that time, he did a poster where it was a New Yorker's view of the United States. And it was here, and the Mississippi, the Hudson River was over here, and then the rest of it was right here. And it became a pretty famous poster, but it describes the provincialness of New Yorkers totally. And I said, my God, these people,
yeah.
they know a lot.
Now, after the Air Force ended, where did you guys decide to settle down?
Well, I was being trained to be the endocrinologist at Long Island Jewish Hospital.
Okay.
And the chief of medicine knew people at Mass General. And so he made arrangements for me to become a fellow, you know, after I applied appropriately at Mass General. And so we went to Boston. And, you know, the Mass General experience was a great experience. The Boston experience wasn't a great experience because there was no parking. Like, I taking my son Bradley to Montessori school in Cambridge someplace every Saturday. And the thing that happened is I drop him off, and then I'd have to pick him up. So I would go to Harvard Square. I couldn't park the car anywhere. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's impossible. So I'd be riding around trying to park the car. They didn't even have garages at that time. And then I'd end up going back to pick them up after I gave up. I had a hi-fi set there that had broken. And the only place to fix it then was in a shop at Harvard Square. I was driving around the car for about 4 months with that thing until I got it. So And when I was a fellow, I moonlighted in Boston, in one of the suburban hospitals in Boston, and got to know some of the guys out in those hospitals. And I had all kinds of job offers, so we were going to kind of stay there. And then there was a snowstorm in October, and I had a little thin overcoat and my Dodge Dart had a great air conditioner, but the heater didn't work. And I was in this car in this freezing cold, and I couldn't get across any of the bridges that ran from Storrow Drive to where we were living in Watertown. And it took me about 6 hours to make a 20-minute trip.
Oh, boy.
And I walked, and this is wild. I got out of the car, and you know how they always used to have a ritual, I guess, I don't know where you kiss the ground. It wasn't a Jewish ritual, but it was a movie, movie. So kiss the ground outside this place, outside this two-story one-story apartment that we lived in. The owner lived in the upstairs apartment. I went in the house and I said, Cecilia, after the snowstorm's over, please go and figure out where the demographics is right for an endocrinologist to go practice. And she was great. We had a couple of towns, and Dallas was one, Houston was one, Atlanta. We didn't want to go to California, and Atlanta was one. Atlanta had a problem with their governor. He was a nut, and so we were going to go to Atlanta just on the basis of that information, and we came to Dallas.
Yeah. It made your life here then.
Yeah.
And then where did you practice?
I practiced in the Douglas Plaza building. I started in the Douglas Plaza building, which is in Preston Center. The reason for it is Presbyterian had just opened their building, and I was going to practice at Presbyterian building. It was pretty steep. The finish out was pretty steep, and I had passed Dr. Brooks Haler's office. That was Carol Alcack's father. And he was a wonderful guy. He was a friendly, wonderful guy. Sat down. What are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to practice clinical endocrinology. And there were no clinical endocrinologists in town. Everybody thought it was very, very academic. And all they did was measure blood and do some tests and never give anybody an answer. No, that's not true. Well, so Fred said to me, look I'm going to tell you where to practice, and just think about it. And he said, you get into the Douglas Plaza building, and they'll be able to get you a small space. And he didn't have an investment in it, I know that. And he said, the reason is that the people that live in Highland Park will not come to you if you're at Presbyterian. Because if they go north of Northwest Highway, this was at that, they get a bloody nose. So if you stay right in the middle, you'll do fine. I'll never forget that. I walk around, guy has something here, and I'm not going to have a lot of patients in the hospital. And if I do have to run back over to the hospital, it's only 10 minutes away. And it was very successful.
Yeah. You've mentioned Cecilia quite a bit. Where did you meet her?
On a blind date. My aunt drove me crazy. And then I said, all right, to get rid of you, I'll take her out. And I fell in love with her the first day.
Yeah. What advancements have you seen in the medical field from when you started to where we are today? Has there been one significant jump, or has there been several things that you knew back then were going to really advance?
Oh, there are many, many, many things that have happened, not just one significant thing. The technology is excellent. A diplomat would say it's a two-edged sword, because the more technology you have, the less thinking you do. Right. And the clinicians that taught me, all they had was their hands and a stethoscope. And if they were really good, they had understanding of the patient and empathy for the patient. Now, the connection between the patient or the doctor-patient relationship is gone, or almost gone. Some guys around, and women, are really good and understand the importance of the doctor-patient relationship. The So we had CAT scans, we had MRIs, we had ultrasounds, we had, and my research was in protein chemistry. So you're able to measure growth hormone, you're able to measure cortisol, and you're able to measure all the developments that if you speak to a surgeon, what they see is the CAT scan and the MRI. But the real development, some of the big developments, is understanding the chemistry of the body. Now, the old-time clinicians who had nothing but their hands, their stethoscope, and a couple of blood tests, what they did was they heard, they saw, they felt, they touched, they listened. And listening is the most important advance. If you listen, somebody's going to tell you what's wrong with them. Mm-hmm. And if you're able to ask the right questions, because it's difficult for people to express, on this and this time, this is happening. And they forget, if it stops bothering. And what's wrong with medicine is a lot of things that have happened as a result of government interference. Yeah. Because they had to figure out how to control something. So, all the advances that you have are kind of like not where it's at. It's where it's at is the patient saying what hurts. Right. And telling you what hurts so that you could figure it out. And there are all kinds of things that are cloudy that you could peel away the skin and figure out the diagnosis. In 1989, 1990, my practice had grown very large by that time. And I had 3 other people beside me. And I was known locally and regionally. And then from that people knowing me regionally, it was kind of like nationally some guys knew me. And some guys were starting a new organization to represent clinical endocrinologists. Clinical endocrinologists being endocrinologists in practice who were having socioeconomic problems because the government didn't recognize endocrinology as a specialty, and we were internists. So I said no once, twice, 6 times. And then it bothered me so much, I said, all right, I'll go. And they were having a steering committee meeting in Chicago. So I flew up to Chicago to participate in the steering committee. And I had never met, there were 30 guys and women who were so focused and dedicated to making people aware of clinical endocrinology. I had the first practice of clinical endocrinology outside the medical school in Dallas when I started in 1970. So I joined. You know what Woody Allen says? That 80% of it is showing up, right? So I showed up and I became president. Now, on the way to becoming president, I always had this mission in mind to not only promote the endocrinologists, but promote the health of people with endocrinological problems. This was in medical school. And I also, Suzanne and I loved to ski. So I would do ski sessions and, ski meetings, because at that time you could deduct the ski meeting. And during one of the ski meetings, somebody from a thyroid pharmaceutical company came up to me and said, you know what we need, Dr. Feld? We need a thyroid awareness month. And I'm thinking, if we have a thyroid awareness month, she's going to sell more thyroid. But it's not bad for us because we'll be able to have a better platform in which to describe what the clinical endocrinologist does. So we did it. And I did the first 6 thyroid awareness months. Well, the funny thing, I was getting real balled up here. And she said, you know what? Rather than fighting it by trying to do this and do that, and just cut the whole thing off. I can't do that. You're kidding. So the public relations firm that I picked bring me up to New York because that's where they were based. And they wanted me to have a media trainer. So I remember her name was Joyce Newman. And she says to me, no good. She asked me a couple of questions, and she takes the video, doesn't show it to me. And then she says, come on. And she takes my hand, and she takes me downstairs to a barber. And she says, cut it all off. use a #1 rake. It's exactly what my wife wanted me to do about a year and a half ago. And then she retakes the picture and shows it to me. And she was just wonderful media trainer. Where you get, oh, what am I going to say in front of this thing? The lights are on. You're going to say something stupid. No, don't worry about saying anything stupid. Just say it and say it so that people can understand it. And so, and we made a great contribution to endocrinology, not only in terms of Thyroid Awareness Month. One of the funny things with Thyroid Awareness Month, I was not really pleased with the advertising company that we had, the PR company that we had.
Right.
So the pharmaceutical company that had total hands-off on this, they just gave me a pile of money and go spend it. Said, I'm taking you to the best, I'm going to introduce you to the best public relations firm for medicine in the country. So, okay, so we go into this fancy room, and 8 people in the room, and they're telling me they're trying to sell themselves, and they're giving me a spiel about how much they know about thyroid disease, and it was clear that they knew nothing.
Right.
So I said, okay, open up your shirt and bend your head back and swallow. And I went around the room and I picked 4 of the 8 people had enlarged thyroid glands, because 4 of the 8 people had thyroid disease. And so rather than getting upset with me, they said, what do you call that? I said, what do you mean, what do you call that? You learn that in the 2nd year of medical school. No, you have to have a name for it. No. So out of frustration, I said, neck check. In unison, they all got up, said, what a great name. And I think they have about 10 million of these cards out now on, how to do a neck check.
Oh, wow.
So, there have been interesting experiences along the way with that, and writing guidelines for thyroid and diabetes were fun. So that was really that was really gratifying.
Now, in your lifetime, you've lived through so many momentous occasions. You were a young child during World War II. You lived through the Vietnam era, of course, President Kennedy assassination, something good, the moon landing for the first time in '69, of course, the tragedy of 9/11. Was there something on the national scene that stood out that you go, gosh, I know exactly where I was the day it happened?
I know every one of them. No, I know every one of them. I mean, one of the things I have is a pretty good memory still.
Does one of them stand out the most?
No, they were all horrible.
Yeah.
I remember, and this scared the hell out of me. This is not the one that stands out the most, but the one that scared the hell out of me is I was working up a guy in the hospital who had just had a heart attack, and he was 28 or 9, and I was 25 then. And we had these little black and white television sets in the hospital room, and he's watching it, and all of a sudden, Walter Cronkite comes on. And I'm trying to get history from this guy, and he's having a dying spell. And Walter Cronkite comes on and says that, and I said, oh my God. And what I was thinking about it, I said, life's inches.
Yeah.
And, that was the take-home point of that, life is inches.
Right.
And it was inches for this guy that was 29. It's inches for 29 with a heart attack on. And it was Kennedy, 44 or 45 at that time.
Yeah.
So life is inches. And then I remember I was on that Saturday on call. We were sitting around, and the doctors, whatever they had there. And when Jack Ruby came out with the gun and shot Oswald, that was something from the Kennedy time. I remember I was at Parkland Memorial Hospital residence lounge when they landed on the moon, and that was exhilarating. Oh, totally exhilarating, because the guy said this, and he said that in 10 years we're going to land on the moon. Yeah. Son of a gun. The government did something to get it for 10 years. That's incredible. I mean, I had this incredible dichotomy between what the government can do and what they can't do. And, that was something. 9/11 was a terrible tragedy. I remember one of my friends called me up and said, "Turn the television on right now." He wouldn't tell me what happened. I turned the television on, and here it was. We're getting barbaric. The thing's out of control, and it is out of control. Then it's still out of control.
You and Cecilia have 2 children, 1 grandchild. What advice does Granddad have for the next generation?
Well, we ain't seen nothing yet. There's going to be tremendous advances. What we think, or if we think we've advanced, we haven't advanced at all. I mean, you could just use analogies between a typewriter and a selectric, and then people don't even know what a selectric is, much less what a typewriter, an old-timey typewriter. And the speed of change, and this is advice, the speed of change gets more and more and more rapid. Now, you don't see it when you're right in the middle of it, or it's very difficult to see it when you're right in the middle of it, but we're going to, I mean, it's just unlimited unless we blow ourselves up, and we could blow ourselves up with all the manipulations and all the anger and all the frustration that's going on. But I'm very hopeful that we will see this rapid change, and I see that with my son. One of my sons, I mean both of them, but one in particular, Bradley, because he's a venture capitalist that invents, actually, he started the startup revolution. And so he invests in startup companies. And I see the companies that he invests in, and it's like in space. Not that he's not investing in space, but the advances of people learning from the last lesson are just out of sight. So this invention creates this invention, which creates this invention, and hopefully it'll lead to a better life for everybody if they're hopeful. The problem that I see is more and more people get depressed because they can't absorb all the stuff and all the noise that's going on. And so there's lots and lots of personality conflicts and lots of who am I and where am I going and what am I doing, and less centered people. And I don't see any easy mechanism to make people who are getting unraveled centered in a mass-produced, commoditized way. And that's what makes sense to not getting them unraveled in a commoditized way, but what makes sense to how we're going is credit cards. I mean, I just had this emotional experience the other day where you go into a store and they inspected your credit card, day this, day that, and then you had to sign it. I went into the store and I bought $45 worth of stuff for something. I didn't have to sign it. Now, if I had dropped my credit card on the table and I didn't have to sign it, $45. Now, the limit of your liability is $50, but it so infrequently happens that it's expedient to ignore it, right, rather than to keep people disciplined. Right. And we're not disciplined. So, that's just a philosophical thought that I'm throwing in now, and that's what I say is stay to my grandchild, and she's fabulous. Stay centered, and she is. Stay interested in a bunch of stuff, and she is. And my son Daniel and his daughter, my daughter-in-law, are doing a fabulous job with her. I told that to Cecilia yesterday. We did a Skype call. Now, think about that. 15 years ago, was there Skype?
Of course.
And instantly, you're there.
Now, you and Cecilia, have you been involved with the Jewish community at all?
Just in terms of being identified with the Jewish community, in terms of doing activities in the Jewish community, the answer is very, very little. Not because we've avoided it, we've just had so much stuff going on that we haven't had time to do it.
Okay. Thanks for doing this today.
I hope I did
You did a great job.
All right, we'll see.